Whether he's overseeing the acclaimed NXT product or defying his age and aches in great matches in recent years, there's much to appreciate about Triple H in this day and age. And of course, his body of work prior to taking a reduced schedule also deserves its share of appreciation. And yes, we know there are some questionable times when Triple H maybe went over people that he shouldn't have gone over, like Booker T, but otherwise there is a long list of excellent matches from the game's back catalogue to choose from, whether they're technical classics or highly dramatic main event brawls. Whether you think his King of Kings nickname is accurate or not, spoiler alert, I think it's very, very accurate indeed, you must agree that Triple H has given more than his share of good to the wrestling world. These 10 matches are Hunter Hearst Helmsley at his wrestling best. So without any further ado, I'm Jack from Cultaholic.com, and these are 10 Triple H matches you need to see. Join us. Number 10, Triple H vs. The Rock at BACKLASH 2000. It's hard to find a not excellent Triple H match from the year 2000, to be honest, as his work and the general praise for his work were at their respective peaks. His defense of the WWF Championship against The Rock at Backlash did come with the era-appropriate amount of heelish deck stacking, because obviously The Rock had to overcome the odds in John Cena fashion. The McMahon-Helmsley regime were there to make sure that Helmsley retained his belt, but to counter, Rock had an undeniable ace in his hand. It was announced prior to the match that a then-recovering Steve Austin would have The Rock's back, so obviously the excitement level was at fever pitch. The fact that Austin then didn't show up for the start of the match only increased this frenzied atmosphere, because we all knew that something would happen later on. In a match that really probably should have been the WrestleMania main event, Rock overcame every obstacle, from Vince McMahon's interference to Shane McMahon's corrupt officiating, only to begin to falter and tire in the closing stages. That is when Stone Cold Steve Austin's music hit and the fans in DC collectively exploded, and because it's Stone Cold Steve Austin, all hell began to break loose. This was the perfect match to generate a hyped crowd atmosphere from start to finish, with the perfect guys as hero and villain. It's fair to say that Rock's victory wouldn't have been nearly as sweet had somebody other than Triple H been his final boss. Number 9, Triple H vs. The Undertaker, WrestleMania 27. The end of an era Hell in a Cell match from 1 year later left fans and critics with divided opinions. Some hailed it as an all-time classic, while others found it dull and self-serving. Personally, I think it's a wonderful match and I would highly recommend it, but instead, we've stuck this one on the list. Yes, many fans were more keen on the match they had in Atlanta 1 year prior, in which Triple H appeared to come closer than anyone else had done in history to snapping The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak. The two aging warhorses fought tooth and nail, destroying each other all through the ringside area, and also destroying the ringside area, before building to a rather unexpected closing sequence. Instead of the more traditional back and forth series of big moves and near falls to keep the fans on their toes, Triple H began dominating the suddenly weakened Phenom. Triple H pulverized a disheveled Undertaker with a chair to the head, a tombstone, and other devastating blows, before getting trapped in Undertaker's Hell's Gate for a sudden, dramatic submission finish. The tension and uncertainty as the match finally came to a head firmly puts this near the top of both men's WrestleMania resumes. Number 8, Triple H vs. The Rock, SummerSlam 1998. The final two matches of one of the best SummerSlams of all time could not have been more appropriate. Bonafide main eventers Steve Austin and The Undertaker fought last for the WWF Championship, while the two next big things in Triple H and The Rock battled for the Intercontinental Championship in a ladder match. Clearly, Vince McMahon was fortifying his main events of the future by giving two hot up-and-comers their stage to shine, and shine they most certainly did. While the crowd inside Madison Square Garden virtually turned The Rock babyface through his excellent performance, Triple H went blow for blow with the People's Champ, despite the fact that he was working with a severely injured knee. The match is often thought of as the breakthrough match for both men, the first match of the year candidate that either would have in their distinguished careers, and the best match of a stacked SummerSlam. This pretty much assured that Rock and Triple H would both ascend to bigger and better things, and given Triple H's status as NXT's cool dad, isn't it a little bit appropriate that his breakthrough match had a yellow ladder? Do you see what's happened there? Maybe they knew something, or maybe it was just a coincidence. Number 7, Triple H vs. Daniel Bryan, WrestleMania 30. Bret and Owen Hart's clash at WrestleMania 10 probably remains unmoved as the best opening bout in WrestleMania history, but this match certainly deserves the honor of being in second place. Daniel Bryan and the fans' rage against the corporate machine shaped the first New Orleans WrestleMania, and his match with Triple H was part of a special stipulation that would see the winner inserted into the WWE Championship main event. But in order to get there and face Randy Orton and Batista, Bryan would have to dismantle the face of the dreaded Authority. While many may have expected this match to be very heavy on sports entertainment madness, what we were given instead was a highly scientific match between the consummate indie darling and a 44-year-old part-timer that hadn't really been in a pure wrestling match for quite some time. And it worked. Of course it worked, because not only is Daniel Bryan brilliant, but Triple H is a brilliant wrestler too. The wrestling, counter-wrestling, and general sense of competitiveness fused new school innovation with old school ideas, making for a match we weren't so used to seeing in a WWE ring, much less at WrestleMania. From a pure wrestling standpoint, this may well be the best technical match that Triple H has ever had. Number 6, Triple H vs. Ric Flair, Survivor Series 2005. This is a criminally forgotten match that may actually be Ric Flair's best one-on-one match in WWE, maybe alongside that match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 24. The issues between Triple H and Flair were a bit thin in terms of storytelling, but they made up for it with a pair of hellacious brawls, a steel cage match at Taboo Tuesday in 2005, followed by a last man standing match 4 weeks later at Survivor Series. And if you've never seen it, we would highly recommend you give it a watch on the network, because if not, you're missing out on some hate-filled goodness. For nearly 30 minutes, Triple H and Flair ripped into one another, temporarily making you forget that Flair was, by this point, not far off from being a senior citizen. Both men bled horrifically, especially Ric Flair, no surprises there. Triple H showed no mercy, however, at one point torturing Flair with a screwdriver. There was nothing particularly show-offy or ironic about this match, nor were any of the spots just stunts for the sake of having stunts. This was a brawl, plain and simple, and one that bordered on perfection. Number 5, Triple H vs. Chris Jericho, Fully Loaded 2000. That's right, another last man standing match, and usually last man standing matches are pretty tricky to pull off well, but when you have someone with the expertise, experience, and sense of timing that Triple H does, the chance of success becomes a lot more likely. Chris Jericho jumped from WCW to WWF with a hell of a lot of main event potential, but it didn't really ignite straight away. However, midway through the year 2000, Jericho finally realized his main event potential, and this was a feud that helped to spark it, he and Triple H in a memorable rivalry. This last man standing match went a long way in affirming that Jericho belonged in WWE's upper echelon, as it was really one of the first matches he'd had where he was more of a WWE style brawler as opposed to a globe-trotting cruiserweight wizard, as we'd previously seen him in WCW and over in Japan. There was plenty of drama to be had here through various near 10 counts before a bloody Triple H managed to beat the final count while Jericho lay motionless. In a year simply full of epic matches, it's high praise to be near the top of the 2000 heap, which of course Triple H managed to do quite often. Number 4, Triple H vs. Cactus Jack, Royal Rumble 2000. Do you see what we mean about the year 2000? This year was absolutely loaded, wall to wall with Triple H's finest work, and one of his most brutal matches ever came at the beginning of the calendar, when he was matched up with Cactus Jack inside Madison Square Garden with the WWF Championship at stake in a no-holds-barred street fight. You knew that the match was probably going to be violent, but you might not have been expecting quite these new standards of violence that WWE set on that cold New York night. After all, this was the birth of the barbed wire 2x4 in WWE canon, and boy does it rip up Triple H like Christmas wrapping paper when Foley tees off on him with the weapon. 4 years later, Randy Orton came of age in a wild no DQ match against Mick Foley, and this was the equivalent for Triple H. He was booked to withstand the worst beating imaginable, to come back and win with 2 pedigrees, the latter of which was onto a sea of thumbtacks. It managed to out ECW what was actually happening in ECW at the time, and only a stubborn few would question Triple H's world title credentials after this match. Number 3, Triple H vs. Shawn Michaels vs. Chris Benoit, WrestleMania 20. Now, for obvious reasons, this bout has been scrubbed from WWE history, which is really a shame because in truth, it's one of the best WrestleMania main events of all time. While the physical work in this match was absolutely top-notch, the aura really added something. Up until this point, Triple H never ever seemed to lose to anybody's favourite wrestlers, especially those who were close to breaking through WWE's glass ceiling. So when Benoit dragged a blood-soaked Helmsley down into the crippler crossface, even the most dedicated supporters of the underdog maybe didn't quite think that Triple H would tap out. And that is the power of Triple H as the ultimate supreme heel, because when he lost, it meant the world. The jubilation at Benoit's triumph wouldn't have meant nearly as much if it didn't come at the expense of a huge roadblock, and Triple H, of course, is the perfect example. Number 2, Triple H vs. Stone Cold Steve Austin, No Way Out 2001. This match saw the birth of the 3 stages of hell stipulation, a rather ambitious 2 out of 3 falls endurance test with different stipulations filling out the template. And of course, Triple H and Austin had spent a lot of time actually attempting to literally murder one another, so something this intense was probably needed. And so the match was laid out like this: standard rules for the first fall, a no DQ bout for the second, and a steel cage for the deciding battle. You don't often see singles matches in this era go almost 40 minutes, let alone one involving Stone Cold just 5 months after returning from spinal surgery, but this match did so and excelled in the process. The brawling was utterly relentless, cutting a swift pace through the marathon duration of the match, and the crowd was absolutely electric for just about all of it. Triple H managed to eke out a victory over the WrestleMania #1 contender, but the real winners here were anyone hoping to see an unfiltered fight to the near death. Even the highest hopes in this match were probably surpassed. And finally, number 1, Triple H versus Shawn Michaels, SummerSlam 2002. This match is, to be honest, almost incomprehensible. Triple H had been in some really good bouts after his return from quad surgery in early 2002, but nothing quite like his previous standard. Shawn Michaels hadn't wrestled in a WWE ring in more than 4 years, so expecting a quick return to past brilliance seemed a little bit absurd, really. And despite that, what these two best friends came up with was something that could have made marks out of hardened cynics, an old-school revenge story that knew zero bounds. And though some continue to give Shawn Michaels all of the credit for this unsanctioned match's greatness, it's Triple H who helps him tell this simple yet effective story. That story is the old gunslinger shaking off the dust and cobwebs to put the man who took his place back in his place with an unbridled ass-kicking. When you consider just how many one-on-one matches the two have had together, they can never ever really top this one. It was the right crowd, the right night, the right story, the right action, and each man had the right opponent. So that's our list of 10 Triple H matches you absolutely need to see. Thank you very much for listening, and be sure to leave any of your favourite matches we've left out in the comments section down below. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to at JackTheJobber. You can follow all of us at Cultaholic, and check out our Patreon too at patreon.com/Cultaholic. And once again, if you haven't already, do not forget to hit subscribe and to join us.